local business owners. We are excited to be here today with you. I am Danielle Harris, head of marketing at Bank of Central Florida. And today we are here with General Beef and General Jake. And they are going to share a lot of their experience, both recently in the military, specifically the Air Force. And do you mind sharing a little bit about your background? Do you want to start, General
Sure,
Jake?
Danielle, and thanks to you and Austin for setting this up. But I grew up in Florida and attended Winter Haven High School, graduated in 1977, and went off to the Air Force Academy where I met my good friend Beef here. And in 1981, graduated and started a long career in the Air Force, 34 years, and retiring in 2015.
Wow.
After I was the commander of 9th Air Force headquartered in South Carolina. I flew a lot of airplanes while I was in the Air Force, but primarily the F-16 and the U-2, which is a high-altitude spy plane, what most people know it by. And I had commands all over the world, truly, from Korea to Afghanistan to the United Arab Emirates and all over the United States. And we'll go into some of that in my recap. But had that and then retired 2015 and came right back to Polk County and now live in Winter Haven, where my wife and I grew up.
Yeah, one of those planes was the F-18, right?
Well, I flew in a lot of airplanes, and I flew the F-18 a number of times that we can go into, but I was never the pilot in command of an F-18.
Ah, okay. And that is the plane that was most recently in Top Gun.
That's correct. And I've dogfighted with the F-18 and pilots flying the F-18 dozens of times, and I won every time.
It's important that you won. So does it look and feel the same way as it seems like in the movie?
It does. I think the movie, the second Top Gun movie, was excellent. And I still remember my catapults off of the USS Eisenhower in the Gulf of Oman. They'll never go away from my memory. That is truly a bucket list kind of thing,
cool.
Is to catapult off of an aircraft carrier.
Yeah, it amazes me just seeing that big of a machine in the air and taking off like that. Anyway, how about you? Did you do the same thing?
Danielle, thanks again for having me. And did I do the same thing? Not quite. I went a different track, and I was a C-130 pilot. I like to be able to get up out of the seat, go to the back, and use the restroom rather than having to pee in my leg.
Yeah.
But my background is, my name's Richard Haddad. I go by Beef, and I'll get to that in a second.
Awesome.
But I grew up in this small copper mining town in Arizona and had the opportunity to go to the Air Force Academy to play football. And I graduated from high school in 76, a year before Jake, because I wasn't smart enough to get in the academy. My SAT scores weren't good enough, but I was kind of being recruited for football, and they have a prep school, which is there for enlisted members that are now going to the academy or for blue chip athletes. So I went a year to the prep school, which is on the same grounds as the academy, and then graduated with Jake in 1981. And went off to pilot training and flew C-130s after pilot training. But while I was at the prep school, I was much bigger. I had more hair. Gravity hadn't set in. My feet were a little smaller, and I acquired this nickname Beef, which has lasted my entire 35-year career. And then I got off active duty and went to the reserve as a citizen airman, and I was able to get hired by the airline as well, and have the best of both worlds for over 30 years.
Awesome.
But the last 9 years I was on active duty. I took a leave of absence from the airline and then went back in 2017 after I retired from the Air Force, and then flew for the airlines for another few years and decided to take an early out there as well when the coronavirus popped up. So that's quick and dirty. I flew primarily special ops C-130s, an AC-130, which is the gunship, and then the MC-130, which is a penetrating tanker, which goes on behind enemy lines and refuels helicopters. So nothing as exciting as Top Gun, but it was pretty interesting.
But Danielle, beef is one of the more decorated, and I mean decorated with awards and medals of all of our general officers recently, with 3 distinguished flying crosses with valor. It's cool. To get 1 is incredible. To have 3 is an amazing accomplishment. And wow. we are sitting with a true American hero, Beef Haddad.
Well, awesome. I would say that we're sitting with 2 because Jake has flown. I mean, here's a general officer, and now we're the Mutual Admiration Society, but Jake flew as a general officer, the U-2 in combat. That's unheard of too, to have a general officer flying in that kind of a weapon system as a general. So, well,
regardless, I think I and our listeners would very much be able to say thank you for your service and contribution to our military. Much appreciated. I didn't say that in the beginning, but should have. So I did that last time too, didn't I? But thank you very much. So, all right. So that's the beginning. So you both have served quite a few years in the military, which we'll talk a little bit about that through some of the questions. But you then got back into civilian life and you started Two Blue Aces, correct?
Right. And Two Blue Aces is a consulting company here in Central Florida. And the name, my son, Eric, helped us devise that. And ACEs in Air Force terminology are pilots who have scored 5 aerial victories in combat. And incidentally, there hasn't been an ace in the United States military, Navy, Air Force in decades. I think the last one was in Vietnam, Steve Ritchie, an Air Force Academy graduate. Wow. But we all hold them in high accord. And so Two Blue Aces is actually where that came from. Beef and I are Air Force Blue. My wife is actually the managing partner of the company, so she's the first ace, and then I'm the second. But when we're in groups like this, Beef and I are the Two Blue Aces.
You switch off, huh?
That's right.
Stick as a team. Awesome. Well, thank you for explaining that. We are going to start with General Beef. Can you explain the big differences? So a little bit of background here too. You spent quite a bit of time in the reserves, and you were second in command over the Air Force Reserves.
That was my last job as the vice commander of the Air Force Reserve Command.
Okay.
So yeah, okay. There are 3 components in the Air Force. There's the active duty with 300 and some thousand members.
Okay.
There's the Guard with 105,000, and there's a reserve with 70,000. The Guard works for the governor. In their day-to-day job, they work for the governor. And then if they're needed federally, then they get put on orders to work federal positions and jobs.
Okay.
With the reserve, we're federally mandated, but the Guard and the reserve are all citizen airmen. So as the taxpayer, you only pay us when we're working. So we're the best bang for the buck because we have to maintain all the same qualifications that the active duty does, but we do it on a part-time basis.
Interesting.
And we have to do 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year is what's required. But really, to maintain all those qualifications, you have to volunteer a heck of a lot more to be able to do that. So they take, we have this thing called a 3-legged stool. And what that means is a reservist is having to balance his primary job. I was an airline pilot, his reserve job, and then you've got family in there. And the joke is, if you got them all mad at you at the same time, you're probably doing pretty well. But it isn't easy. I mean, it takes a lot for an individual to have to do all that. And some folks, their reserve unit will be miles and miles away. Might have to fly to their organization. They might have a long drive. So it takes a lot of sacrifice to be able to serve our country as citizen airmen. But the bottom line is we're all needed. So when we go to war, the active duty just doesn't have enough people and structure to maintain all those requirements that are being asked of them. So they rely on the Guard and Reserve to fill those gaps.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for explaining that. If you don't know a ton about the military, I mean, I didn't have a ton of people in my family as part of the military. My great grandfather was a pilot in the World War II, but as far as that goes, I haven't had a whole lot. So,
did I get it right, Jake?
I think
Perfect.
All right.
Yep.
Yeah, it's well explained. Thank you. It was good. It was good. So,
and incidentally, when Jake started Two Blue Aces,
mm-hmm.
he started it out with his brother, who's a reserve 2-star general, and two of his best buddies who are active duty generals and brothers as well. So there were two sets of brothers, and then yours truly. I was the odd man of the group, and
But you're
and
like
the
a
only,
brother.
and the only non-fighter pilot. So I don't know why they let me into the family, but I'm happy to be a part of Two Blue Aces post-retirement and having something to do like this rather than twiddling my thumbs at home now that I'm retired from all these jobs.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. When you decided to start Two Blue Aces, you had retired. How long was that length between retiring and then deciding to start the company?
It was about 6 months, and that was the time where my wife, Sandra, was trying to get me to go do something instead of just being in the house all the time.
Driving me crazy,
We took 6 months off. We exercised a lot. We rode up and down the beach and biked and walked and exercised. But it was either going to be work for a big defense prime like Lockheed Martin or Boeing or somebody like that, or start a business where we could, as a very small, agile company, provide advice and consulting to small, agile companies that wanted to learn how to work with the Pentagon and work with the government. And we do a lot of that still today.
Yeah. So, and that's more of a niche rather than just any companies. Though you serve any companies with consulting, there is somewhat of a niche when you're working with vendors or businesses who want to work particularly with the Pentagon, correct?
Right. Yeah, exactly, Danielle. We currently work for two very large American defense companies as consultants to them as to what the roadmap is for the U.S. military and how they can continue to anticipate things. But we also work for much smaller companies, paving companies. We work for a number of and advise the president and provosts of multiple universities here in Florida on where technology is going from a military perspective. So we have a wide swath of client list.
Yeah.
And we're always looking to talk to new clients about working in the high-tech defense and aerospace industry.
Okay. Next question. This goes back to General Beef. What was your most challenging obstacle when you shifted from the military into the consulting business?
I would tell your listeners there really wasn't a big transition. Leadership is leadership, regardless of whether you're in the civilian world or in the military. So it was the same values and lessons that I learned from my military experience that helps translate into a civilian kind of a structure. It's the same issues, the same concerns, the same deals. You're still dealing with people. You're dealing with organizational structures. You're dealing with succession plans, you're dealing with budgets, you're dealing with human resources, all the same things that you do in the civilian world. So I didn't find it to be that much of a transition.
Yeah.
Not to mention I grew up, as I said, in that small copper mining town, and my dad was an entrepreneur. So I kind of grew up in the business world before I went off to the academy and the military.
So what did he do as an entrepreneur?
We owned a clothing store. He owned a beauty shop. We owned a saloon.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was a small little town. And so I had the experience of working in the clothing store from the time I was about 10 years old. The bar, I wasn't old enough, but I did a lot of the inventory and that sort of thing. And
Fine.
it was kind of funny. He had some managers there, and I would go in there and just kind of goof around, and I'd see that they might be doing something inappropriate. And I was about 16 or 17 at the time, and I'd tell them, you need to close the cash register, or you need to do this or that. And then my father would come over and they'd ask him, who's in charge, you or your son? He said, well, when he's there, he is. And when I'm here, I am. So I had a lot of great experience in the business world before I went off to the academy.
Some of that inventory might have gone away when you were 16, 17.
Yeah.
Maybe an extra beer
We're
can
not talking about that here.
I was about to say, at 16 or 17-year-old, I'm sure you were up to something here and there.
Not me. I was a good boy.
Okay, General Jake, can you explain what you mean when you use the expression your audio has to match your video?
Yeah, Danielle, we talked about that a week or two ago briefly, and I love the phrase because in many of my leadership opportunities in the military, I would hear what say a squadron commander's core values were, the things that she emphasized to her people, and I would then say, I'll check. Mm-hmm. And see whether the audio and the video match. And you can rapidly and quickly find out in an organization if what the leadership says is what actually the workers and the managers do. And it's important, I think, for a leader of any company to make sure that what they say is important actually turns out to be important in their actions and how they handle themselves and how they do business with other business leaders. Honesty is the easiest way to look at it. If honesty is one of your core values, are you known in the community as a business person with honesty and integrity? And that audio matching your video is what I really emphasize when we talk to small businesses as they set their core values up. And it's a fun way to approach it. And it's not always a negative. It's sometimes really refining it, isn't it? You refine your core values and then your people reflect them.
Yeah, I love in marketing, clarity is kindness is a big phrase. So sticking to making sure people are clear on what you're expecting or what you're trying to communicate is really important.
Yeah. And honestly, if there is a disconnect, and you are out and about, Beef or I would visit our organizations all the time. And the disconnects were really quickly apparent. And really? When they were not so good, we would fix them quickly. Yeah. Because audio disconnect with your video, what your organization is truly doing every day, it needs to be fixed. And so we would help with that when we needed to.
Yeah.
I would tell your, sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I would tell your listeners that my thoughts on that, I called it leadership by walking around. And I tended to get out of my office and go roam without them knowing that I was showing up. And I'd sit down in different divisions and sit down with the folks that work there, either the civilians or the military or both. And you could get a really good understanding of what was going on in the organization.
Yeah. And one more buzzword for your listeners that maybe they might use, but what Beef is talking about is analog leadership. I mean,
analog leadership.
It's out and about. It's talking face to face, either to your potential customers or to your workers. But digital leadership in today's world often ends up being emails and phone calls and Zoom meetings because they're done over the virtual sphere. And we found in all our experience that analog leadership out and about is the way to really, truly impress your people about your core values.
Yeah, absolutely. We are very much experiencing the same thing as we grow. How do we keep our culture? How do we keep our core values instilled within our people? And being able to have conversations outside of email, picking up the phone, calling somebody and asking them the question with the right tone and them understanding more of the context of where you're coming from makes a really big difference. Or even seeing body language, like you said, going and walking over to the next person's office rather than doing a Zoom meeting from home. It's still a really important piece of working together and communicating.
It makes a big difference, Danielle.
Yeah,
I give this presentation on relationships, which I think you're going to get to in a bit. But I spoke to some Johnson & Johnson salespeople recently, and my neighbor gave me this excellent example of what Jake's talking about. When he first started as a young radiologist, they worked in the hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
They had these huge screens with these x-rays that they would put up on these screens. And the doctor, who might be the orthopedic surgeon or whatever, and some of the folks that worked within that construct would all stand around those slides, and they would look at what was going on. And the radiologist would ask the orthopedic surgeon questions, let's say.
Yeah.
Orthopedic surgeon would ask the radiologist questions, and there was learning kind of going on both directions. Today, he works in his home, and he does all these x-rays on his home screens. He writes this report.
Yeah.
And never do the two really talk to each other, unless it's some situation where they may reach out to the radiologist about something, but normally it's not that way.
Yeah.
The way it was under that analog kind of construct.
Wow, what a great example. Yeah, very interesting. I mean, there's a loss of learning that could be seen with only sticking to digital avenues. General Beef, what values do you believe the military instills that are applicable in any operation or business that is ran?
Well, as I said, that's pretty easy. I grew up in the business world, and relationships were important. Obviously, respect, responsibility, all those things were core growing up. But then I joined the Air Force. And the Air Force has 3 core values that everyone understands, and it's integrity, service before self, and excellence in all we do. And you should be able to, and those core values are values that you would have within your organizations in the civilian sector. So it's nothing new to somebody that should be building their business from the ground up, having some sort of values. The Marines have a different set, but essentially the same. The Army, duty, honor, country, which you've heard of. So they all have these core values, and you should be able to go to the lowest ranking person or the highest ranking person, and they should be able to articulate those values. Yeah,
and you said excellence in all you do, integrity, what was it?
Integrity and service before self.
Service
excellence in all you do, and integrity in either any one of those directions. But
yeah, I didn't quite catch that third one. So service before self, and integrity.
And again, in the military, that one is so important because there's a lot of sacrifice that goes on, in families for long deployments and everything. So we would emphasize how important it was for the individual military members to realize that they were part of the military team. And they were going to sacrifice a lot. They were going to make, family sacrifice. They were going to personally have to live in difficult conditions, et cetera. And so that one was one that, that's very particular to the military, that you're in the service and it's before your needs. You're going to meet the needs of others.
Yeah, you had mentioned how important your wife was as a military wife, supporting you in everything that you did. And then on top of saying that she was one of the reasons 6 months after you retired to say, hey, Blue Aces Consulting, why don't we do something that's along that route?
Yeah, my wife, Sandra, is very educated, very talented, very professional woman, but she put her career on hold as a result of me and us being assigned all over the world. She really had to put her career on hold. But again, now in the business world where we are today, she's very, very capable as the managing partner of the company. Beef's wife, Ginger, is a wonderful lady. She sacrificed a lot, but she's an attorney. She's a very, very highly skilled. So you'll find that many spouses in the military are actually extremely qualified. They just sacrifice for the good of the nation by moving around and putting up with some of the turbulence that's in the military.
Oh, absolutely. Especially with long leaves, I can imagine.
And the benefit of my wife is she was in the Air Force for 25 years, both reserve and active. So as a JAG, so she understood the military and understood what I was doing. So that was really nice.
Did she travel with you quite often?
She went to Korea with me when I was in Korea, and we were stationed in Japan together. That's where we met. So yeah, she did. She went to Washington, D.C. when I was at the Pentagon, and then we were in Georgia for a while. So she moved around quite a bit.
When they were initially married, Danielle, they spent their honeymoon in my son's rooms in the bunk bed because of something that didn't turn out right on their honeymoon planning. But we've known Beef and Ginger for a long time, and honeymoon planning is not one of Beef.
Mexico didn't work out for us.
Oh no!
We ended up in Las Vegas thinking we were going to, during the holidays, thinking, we'll go to Las Vegas and find a room. There were no rooms to be had.
Oh, no. Oh, and that's how he ended up there.
That's right.
I was about to say, why don't you get a hotel room? That's your honeymoon.
There was nothing to be had.
I'm just saying, Danielle.
I do have to ask an important question. So your wife's name is Ginger. Does she have red hair?
No.
What?
She's a Virginia.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Very nice. Very nice. Well, thank you for explaining that and making sure you pointed that out about their honeymoon. I appreciate that. There was a second half to that question, General Beef.
Oh, wait. But I'm a Beef and she's a Ginger. It's easy to remember. It's a very good Chinese dish. So it's hard to forget.
Now I think I'm hungry. General Beef and Ginger. I love it. So the second half of that question was, what is leadership's responsibility when ensuring the culture of a company reflects the values that are established?
Lead by example. The core values that are out there, you set those core values and you need to live by them. You start taking shortcuts or trying to do things in a manner that aren't of the utmost integrity, and then you start having problems because your people are watching you. Yeah. And they're expecting you to set the example.
Yeah,
Jake, go ahead.
It's another example of your audio doesn't match your video. And when a leader of an organization says, here are our core values, here's what I do, here's how I handle myself in business dealings. But then on the side, they're not very honest. You can't really take them for their word. Their audio doesn't match their video. I mean, they really are not very. Yeah. They're not qualified to lead any organization when they say one thing and do another. And it's important to do that. And as senior leaders, Beef and I have had to replace a number of people who thought they could operate that way. Interesting. And for their boss to permit that would be unacceptable at an even higher level. So we were, our role in the military as general officers was to make sure those conditions didn't exist in our organizations. Right.
Because I think I had remembered you saying, you had to be efficient and you had to train the best. Yeah. And there's not room for failure.
Yeah. Because it would really degrade the organization's effectiveness, because like Beef said, you're always being watched. When you're the leader, your people who work for you watch and see how you operate. Yeah. And if it's not good, then it really takes away from the effectiveness of the organization.
Yeah. And it sounds like, leading by example, going back to it, in business owners, it's not as sacrificial probably as being deployed and having to be separated from your family from time to time. But there's still that life balance, like you had mentioned earlier, about having to balance 3 different areas of your life always. And if it's all bad, it's because something's going right.
That's a joke.
I know.
You're supposed to try to keep that stool balanced.
I know. But that's something that entrepreneurs and business owners face quite a bit, because when they're starting or when they're in that stage of growth, they're handling multiple aspects and they're having many hats to wear. So trying to figure out how to lead by example at home and in the business and in the relationships that you're developing to grow your business. That's how I would say, going back to the question, you keep it as established as much as you can
Sure.
by living by those values.
Yeah, and for your listeners, as you think about how startups work and they really establish whether it's services or products that they're delivering,
Mm-hmm.
there are no days in the week. Every day is a
Yeah.
work day and evenings are work days. But as you get more established and your goals are being met and your revenue and profits are relatively where they are, then how do you establish a balance, not only in your own life, but to permit your workers to not always having to work overtime and on weekends and everything? And I think as small business leaders, you really need to say we're at that point now where we really should have some balance in our lives, put our families back on an important point. And then you as the leader have got to do that. You can't be in the office all the time, sending out emails at 9:00 at night and expecting people to answer you.
Right. Yeah.
There's a balance required, and you're the leader. Set it.
Yeah. And do you believe that rest is, I mean, we hear so much about work-life balance and mental health these days. Do you believe that rest is a very big piece in better productivity?
I do completely. And my wife and my sons, but also my executive assistant, when I wasn't getting enough sleep, they would tell me, hey, you need to go home early and reset because you're not being that effective because you're so tired looking. And again, Beef knows.
No, you're right. You're not good if you're sick or you're not feeling well, or you're out of shape, or you have medical problems.
Yeah.
So you've got to find that time to keep yourself.
And it's important too, as a leader of a company, is to take care of yourself.
Or if you're flying a plane.
Well, definitely if you're flying a plane, you really need to get your rest the night before because, it can matter if things go wrong.
Yeah. I mean, you are still, pulling G's? Like if you're under that kind of pressure?
Well, that's why I'll make a point later on that the military is a young woman's organization. It's a very physically demanding, usually job. And for me in the F-16, when I was flying, I flew it all the way till the end of my career, and I was in my 50s. So trying to handle the younger generation in the dogfights that I was in, if I didn't get a good night's sleep the night before, I was going to lose in that dogfight.
Yeah.
So
they were going to challenge you, huh?
They were definitely wanting some of the old man, and they were going to get them if I was not rested.
Yeah. Did you tell them you were keeping them young?
I was, and I used my experiences and my cunning more than I did my physical capability because I was old.
Well, I think it sounds like it was a lot of fun. They keep you on your toes too. Okay, General Jake, you said that you spent more time in the military influencing others to not pull their gun out of their holster. In this case, are there any key ideas you would focus on when sharing with our listeners on how to negotiate with tough clients, board members, or partner situations?
Yeah, Danielle, it's a real solid topic is to how to, in your organization, how to build tactical patience, how to strategically think your way through, not today's meeting, but the long-term goals that you've set with maybe partnering in an effort with another company doing things. But we learned in the military, and I taught the younger officers and non-commissioned officers that they needed to be careful before they pulled a trigger. And whether that was because of the law of armed conflict or proportionality, as we called it, you wouldn't drop a nuke on your enemy if you didn't need to. Well, you wouldn't even shoot a gun at your enemy if it wasn't the right time.
Yeah.
How does that work its way into business? You really, as a business leader, and you're in a meeting or you're in a new situation, you need to listen more than you talk so that you can kind of get a feel for what's going on, how the market is working, who are the leaders in the industry, and why are they the leaders in the industry. And before you decide to open a new branch or before you decide to hire a new sales team when you already have 3, you need to kind of do your homework.
Yeah.
And if you do your homework before you pull the trigger, a lot of times you don't do what you were thinking you were going to do.
Right. Yeah.
You wait for another year to open a new branch or to bring on a new product. And so we would teach that in the military, but Beef and I both know how important that is, for business leaders. It really is. Absolutely.
And a couple examples. Jake is the president of our academy class. We were out there a while back, and he was presenting this new class project. And there's a couple classmates that were just irate, but they were really kind of out of line. And Jake just stood up there and listened and took it all in, and then just made a very calming response to the feedback that he was getting, which was just awesome. And then another example, Jake came out from 9th Air Force when he was the commander of 9th, and I was the vice commander of the reserve. And, I talked about the three components. Even though we're all Air Force, there is some competition. The bottom line, though, is we work for the active duty. And a lot of times the active duty general officers would maybe not take as much time as they needed to understand the Guard and Reserve. Well, because of our relationship, Jake came to Warner Robins and sat down in my conference room with my general officers that were there that day, and we had a great discussion. But Jake sat there, instead of just articulating his position and this is the way it is, he listened to what all these guys had to say, and it was a great couple hours of being able to have this dialogue with this head guy who was in charge of 9th Air Force, which was one of the bigger, numbered air forces in our Air Force. So I think that's the point he's trying to make, is listen before you engage and understand.
Incidentally, and Beef knows this, but the colonels who worked for me were advising me that I should pull out my gun and pull the trigger on some things that they said were not right with respect to the reservists down in Beef's command. And I thought about it for a while. I actually thought about sending an email and saying, Beef, this is not going right. This is not the way it should be. Yeah. But I just kind of felt the need to hear what they had to say before I said anything negative. And when I went down there and talked to them and I heard what was going on and what their circumstances were, I realized that they were right.
Yeah.
And we were wrong. We shouldn't have pulled a trigger and said, you guys are not doing your job right.
Yeah.
And that's how it's tactical patience. You have to really make sure you look at both sides of the equation or hear both sides of the argument before you actually make a move or do something.
Yeah, it seems with the speed of technology and social media over the last 10 to 15 years, things were very quick. You see a comment and it could be taken out of context. And it's almost relearning that seeking understanding and listening is really important.
Yeah, because you can get it wrong real fast.
Yeah.
And then it takes a long time to clean up the mess you made by being wrong if you pulled the trigger too fast.
So, I mean, you spent quite a bit of time, both of you, right, spent quite a bit of time overseas and during the war. I mean, speaking with other ambassadors or representatives of those countries.
Yeah, we had to be patient with our allies.
Yeah.
And it's really not an easy one to go through. It takes a little bit of time to develop, but both Beef and I were stationed in other countries where oftentimes we were on other people's base.
Yeah.
The airfield that we were operating out of was in Iraq or it was in Afghanistan. And there were governors who said, this is my turf.
Right. Yeah.
So we as the U.S., but we as U.S. general officers, we had to make sure that we were not coming across as overbearing and telling people what to do in their country.
Yeah.
So it took a lot of practice to really get what we needed and do what we needed to do, but not necessarily sound like we were giving, the governor of the province of wherever in Afghanistan an order, because they didn't work for us.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost the fine line of humble confidence. You got to be confident, stand your ground, right? But still navigate the conversation of what you've been sent to do.
And you have to make sure your people do the same. I mean,
Mhm. Respect.
Yeah, you have to respect their culture, and the way they do things may not be the same way we do things.
Yeah.
And for us to try to shove it the American way down their throat was not always the right solution either. So it was a fine balance. And you had some American airmen that just didn't get they couldn't figure it out. They couldn't understand that I need to really sit here and understand them. It was, you're doing it my way. And you had to sit and kind of counsel and say, look, you need to go sit down and have a cup of tea and coffee with these people, because that's what they do. They want to be able to know you before they're ready to conduct business with you.
Yeah, I think there's a book. It's either called 2 Cups of Tea or 3 Cups of Tea or something. But if you had a really important issue in the Middle East and you needed to work it out, it was going to take 3 cups of tea, i.e. 3 meetings to actually get what you needed.
Yeah.
And you needed to be patient, because the first cup of tea was simply to, the hello, this is me and nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Second cup of tea is, okay, here's what we need. The third cup of tea showed that you were really willing to go the extra mile, but now we need you to sign this agreement. We need fuel, and we need it now.
And the difference in this country into the business world is we want to conduct business right now. We're ready to start. There is no interlude to try to talk about families or this or that and to get to know you. We want to conduct business. It's all about dollars. Well, over there, it's about learning whether they can trust you or not. So for your listeners, if they're going to deal with people from other countries or cultures, there's another book called Kiss, Bow, or Shake.
What? Kiss, bow, or shake?
Yeah. Well, you shake hands,
so trying
you kiss,
to figure out what's appropriate.
You bow, there's so understanding their culture.
Yeah.
An example, if you're in the Middle East and I cross my legs and point my heel at you, that's rude.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
So you have to know those little things. I was in a meeting one day and a colonel did exactly that.
Yeah.
And the conversation kind of stopped with the Iraqi that was sitting in the seat. And I'm thinking that guy didn't read the book.
Okay. General B, for local business owners and leaders, relationships are important when growing your business, which we've talked a little bit about that. Especially keeping long-term development in your mind. In your efforts in Iraq, what were some key takeaways that you can share from your experience that assisted in building trust in Americans?
Well, Danielle, I had understood relationships from the time I was growing up with my father, who was in this small town and had these relationships. So I understood relationships. I understood them at the academy, developing friends with Jake and a lot of other folks and playing on the football team. So I really had never put a mantra on it until I got to Iraq. And I was there to help stand up the first Air Force base. And
Goodness.
There was a lack of resources. I was a senior advisor. I wasn't a commander, so everything had to be worked, from a negotiating or relationship perspective, not necessarily I'm in charge and this is the way it was going to be. So I had to find ways to help them out and to do the things that we needed to do to get this base up and running.
Wow.
We were able to get a bunch of furniture one day and some stuff and brought it to them. They were amazed that we got all this stuff for them.
I think it was Saddam Hussein's
It was Saddam's furniture,
wasn't it?
And they were amazed because...
Was it really?
Yeah. We got it from the State Department annex that was getting rid of their furniture. And because of the relationships I developed with these folks, I asked them if I could have it. They said yes. Brought it to our base, unloaded it. And these people had this really eerie, it was like an odd look on their faces. Well, I come to find out later on as I'm talking to the general on the base, and I was a colonel at the time, and he's thanking me profusely for what we have done for them to get this base up and running. But he then proceeds to, I think I asked, why would everybody look odd when we brought all this furniture? He says, because that was Saddam's furniture.
My goodness.
But what he also told me that night was, what you have done, we can't thank you enough. And you realize that it's all about relationships.
Yeah.
And I put a mantra on relationships at that point. And from that point on, throughout the rest of my career in the Air Force, I talked about relationships.
Yeah.
You can be the smartest person in the room with all your staff, and you can get things done, but you take it to, you raise the bar when I get to know you as an individual and what makes you tick and what makes you not tick. And having that relationship with the people in your immediate circle make things that much better. And I believe it's relationships not only with family and friends and colleagues and superiors and subordinates, but it's with joint partners and people from other countries that we had to contend with. So all those things are so important, and they were important then in the military construct, but they're just as important in the civilian world and building a business.
Absolutely. I mean, seeking understanding and relationships with future businesses you work with, or even clients these days. I mean, listening to the client, there's jobs out there all about the client and customer satisfaction. You see surveys all the time, and seeking understanding of what they are, how you can serve them is a huge benefit to any company who wants to grow, especially these days with competition. Well, thank you very much again for being a part of this. We really appreciate it. And hopefully we can have you guys come back maybe in a year or two.
Love to.
We'll see. But would love that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Danielle. Thanks, Austin.
Thanks,
All
Austin.
right. Thank you for listening.